Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide. We're going to talk about why people are coming to Idaho. There's a lot of concern. The extremists and the far right is taking over the state. But would it surprise you to learn that a great number of people continue to flow to the gem state because they're trying to escape more controlling, more authoritarian regimes, primarily along the West Coast? And what they bring with them is not only a desire to be free, but also a desire for educational freedom. We'll talk about how that plays into the school choice debate in just a few moments.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Twice a week, I get to sit down and go over some of the issues and some of the media angles on those issues that sometimes are not covered in their entirety. My job here is not to tell you the media is entirely wrong, but simply to flesh out some of the things that conveniently seem to be left out, and then you can make up your own mind. Fair enough? Okay, let's dive in. It's no secret that the Gem State has been a very desirable destination for people for at least the last 3 to 4 years. Anybody who's tried to buy a house in that time can tell you the demand is still off the charts. The prices still in the stratosphere. And take it as a compliment, even though it's tough and it's inconvenient, right? If you don't want to pay those exorbitant prices, just know that there's a reason people are coming to the Gem State. And it's because there is a perception that Idaho is an island of freedom in a nation where freedom is increasingly harder to find. So now, does it actually work out in practice? Well, if you look at, the Institute for Legislative Analysis, they show that, we have this perception of, we're very conservative, one of the reddest of the red states, but actually those who are part of the political establishment, especially the longer term players of the political establishment, tend to govern more like their Democratic counterparts in every other state. So that is shifting as more and more people come here for the purpose of securing their freedom or their children's freedom or their grandchildren's freedom. They also are becoming more involved in politics. Now, this leads to some very interesting exchanges. The nativists, well, I've been a fifth generation Idahoan. You got no business coming to this state. You faker. You're here just to change it. I mean, they're having debates about the one true political party. But for now, the Republican Party still is the best choice for those who have conservative principles. Conservative meaning that they are looking at limited government, limited taxation, fiscal responsibility, more individual freedom. Collectivists, on the other hand, seem to believe that, well, there's no problem that, the state can't make bigger or at least more permanent. But let's talk about this in terms of school choice. There was a great article actually on Fox News that brings some very interesting statistics to light. Here's the headline: West Coast Exodus, driving surge in homeschooling in deep red state called freest in nation. This is a homeschooling mom making the case why Idaho is one of the best places in the nation for homeschooling families. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is she's not necessarily marching in lockstep with everybody on school choice, and she has actually some fairly valid reasons not for doing so. But you have to understand that this is not just a new flash in the pan phenomenon. It's been going on for quite some time. 30 years ago, when my wife and I were new parents, we became friends with a family who moved here from, I think it was South Carolina. One of the reasons they came to the Gem State 30 years ago was because Idaho was much more homeschooling friendly. In other states, if you wanted to homeschool your kids, well, you were at risk of, first of all, having lots of heavy regulatory interaction with the state, and at worst, being thrown in jail, because your kids were truant. We did mention, the public school system is compulsory in virtually every state across the union. Nobody stops to think, why, if an idea is so good, why must it be compulsory? Well, perhaps we can visit that another time. Here are some excerpts from the article, again from Fox News. Audra Talley, board member for the nonprofit advocacy organization Homeschool Idaho, told Fox News Digital a lot of people from California, Oregon, even Washington, where the political climate is driven by more liberal enclaves, conservatives have begun to feel like their voices aren't being heard in those states and in those communities, and have opted to move out into a more conservative state. I'd say that experience jives pretty well with what I've encountered too, after moving back to the Gem State following a 25-year hiatus from living here. Fox News says the Gem State is consistently listed as one of the fastest growing states in the country, largely thanks to migration. The Post-Register newspaper reported Idaho was the nation's fourth fastest growing state percentage-wise in population growth between 2022 and 2023. That's according to U.S. Census Bureau data. So according to research from the Homeschool Hub at Johns Hopkins University, more students left public school to homeschool in the 2022-2023 school year, nearly 4,000 of them, than they did before the coronavirus pandemic, less than 3,000. The research using data from the Idaho Department of Education also found more homeschooling students are accessing public school services than before the pandemic. Now, this can include things like dual enrollment so they can participate in extracurricular activities, football, wrestling, and things like that. But while the pandemic pushed more parents to homeschool, Tally believes it continues to be a popular option in her state because parents are drawn to the freedoms the red state offers parents with minimal government involvement. Now, this is what sets off people with a controlling nature. Tally says Idaho is the freest out of 3 or 4 states in the country that offer homeschooling as an option with very minimal regulation and little direct oversight. This next part is actually going to have some people reaching for their heart pills. She says Idaho law does not require any notification in order to begin or continue homeschooling. No test scores nor work samples need to be filed, according to Homeschool Idaho. You're not required to provide any information about what curriculum you intend to use, your education level or teaching experience, or anything else about your home or homeschool. Now, predictably, this usually leads to charges of, well, how do we know those parents aren't abusing their kids or making them slave away for a nickel a day in the salt mines, which I presume the family must own, or something like that. Why is it that they always jump to that worst case scenario, that belief that, well, if parents weren't being compelled, they would opt not to educate their children? Somehow there's this presumption that parents don't love their kids enough to do the right thing, and that only something that's compulsory, in other words, done at the threat of violence at the hands of the state, can somehow be legitimate. Now, the truth of the matter is, and I say this from having run in homeschool circles, but frankly, my family and I have done it all. We've done homeschool, we've done charter school, we've done private school, we've done public school. And there's a place for each one of those. But the key is to have the choice to freely and voluntarily go where you want to go. And those parents who aren't under the thumb of some bureaucrat who's checking them and making sure that their kids are, doing the same as their public school counterparts are missing the boat. Most cases, those kids are actually doing better, and they're learning things that will not only help them understand what it takes to be a productive and value-creating member of society, but they are also setting the stage for them to become lifelong learners. Because it's not just something that's mandated. You will sit here until you learn this, and then when this part of your brain, which is viewed as a widget, is completed, we put you and the rest of the members of your widget group or class on this assembly line and move them on to the next class. You want to teach kids to be lifelong learners? You want to teach them to really value what they learn and take ownership for their education? This is one of the ways to do it, not forcing it on them. So back to the article again from Fox News. If it didn't scare you away that those freedoms that Idahoans enjoy, that doesn't seem like too much for the average person to handle. The article says it's also why Tally's group is wary of the school choice movement, or actually any other movement that would give the government greater control over homeschoolers. She says it took decades of legal battles for Idaho families to earn the educational freedoms they now enjoy. Now, this is not to put down the school choice movement, but listen to the concern that she expresses here. She says, we've spent 30, 40 years fighting for the autonomy of homeschool parents to educate their children as they see fit with little intrusion on the part of the state. Right now, we've shifted from the mentality of the state needing to control by threat of force that education to now the state going, well, here's some money to do what you already do. And she says, our concern with that is as soon as you offer money to something that you're already doing as a homeschooler, that money always comes with strings attached. Now, that is a really valid concern. And I know that school choice opponents like to use vouchers. It's taking taxpayer money, your public school money, and it's giving it to private, even religious schools, as if somehow that's the worst thing that a kid could ever be exposed to. I don't know if you've seen what's going on in the public schools, but depending on where your kid is, they could be exposed to some really bizarre stuff, which we're supposed to treat as normal and respectable and what everybody really wants for their kids. So the bottom line is that school choice is something that needs to be sussed out. And the more people who move to Idaho seeking freedom, seeking school choice, the better the likelihood it's going to happen. Now, personally, I'm a fan of something along the lines of tuition tax credits. In other words, the money that you use for your child's education stays in your pocket rather than going to your taxes, and then part of it's rebated to you through either, an education savings account or vouchers or anything like that. Any money that goes into the administrative hands of the state is going to come back to you with strings attached. I much prefer the idea that that money just stays in your pocket. It's your money. I know, well, that's our money. That's public school money. Not if it didn't leave my pocket, it's not. It's my money. And if it's my determination to spend it in ways that further my child's education, I can make that choice without any strings whatsoever. All right, back to the article. One more thought here. A 2023 analysis of voters who moved in from other states depicts a red wave crashing down on Idaho. Californians led the pack with 75% registering as Republicans and a mere 10% registering as Democrats. More than 60% of Washington and Oregon transplants who registered to vote in Idaho did so as Republicans. Okay, this is one of the reasons why groups like Reclaim Idaho or Gem State Conservatives are so concerned. They want to get control of the Republican Party because the Republican Party is far and away the place where these people who are determined to be free are going. And frankly, these Main Street caucus groups, the Idahoans, Idaho Leaders United and others, they're all about just perpetuating the same state control that really makes them indistinguishable from their Democratic counterparts. So my hope is that we will continue to see an influx of those who are very serious about freedom, very serious about school choice, very serious about their kids' education, and raising a generation of kids who value their freedoms, who understand the difference between a democracy and a republic. Now that line is being blurred, and I've got to show you this next slide. This is the video that goes along with this is even more amazing, but CNN actually did an incredible segment highlighting how Trump voters better understand the United States better than CNN, because they had a CNN reporter going around a Trump rally and asking these people, well, what about our democracy? Aren't we trying to defend our democracy? Isn't Trump a danger to our democracy? And time and again, these attendees would correct the reporter and say, we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. Look at that chyron down there at the bottom of the screen. Some Trump supporters say America isn't a democracy. And you have some talking head on there saying, well, this is just an idea that Trump handlers have planted in their brains. And okay, really, if that's the case, show me where the word democracy appears anywhere in the U.S. Constitution. No, go ahead, I'll wait. Tell me about the Pledge of Allegiance. It's not an official U.S. government document, but did we pledge allegiance to the democracy for which it stands? We didn't. We pledge allegiance to the republic. And the difference is so plain, or at least it should be so plain, but I'll leave it to Utah Senator Mike Lee, who says, yeah, we're a constitutional republic. Sure, it's a democratic form of government, but calling it a democracy ignores important constitutional limitations put in place by our founders, designed to keep democratic impulses in check. That's the whole point of the Constitution. And it brings us to a final point, and this is really this is a harsh one, but it needs to be made. The people who are promoting, well, we need to open up the primary elections, to everybody, rather than make them, the prerogative of the Republican Party, which at this point is to be closed primaries, closed to Republicans only, not to everybody who wants to come in. See, they're counting on sheer numbers, which is how a democracy operates. And here is an illustration. I'm going to warn you right now. This is a very unpleasant photo to see, but it's also a good illustration of what democracy looks like. It may look bad at first, but don't worry. The one on the right got 51% of the vote. Support your local democracy. And that is the chief difference between a democracy and a republic. In a democracy, as long as you've got a majority of people, as long as you can fool enough people to get 50% plus one, there is no real limit on what they can do, what they can vote for, what laws politicians can enact. In a constitutional republic, individual liberty is the dynamic. It's the basis on which it is founded, which means that the Constitution and other restrictions, separations of powers and limitations on powers prevent officials, even those duly elected through democratic contests, from enacting just any old law that they like, because it's the rights of the individual that are supreme, that need to be protected. In fact, it's the whole reason government exists in the first place. Now, is this being widely taught in public schools? Maybe you'll find it in a few classrooms, but generally, You'll find the democracy mantra being chanted over and over again, which is probably why you have a lot of really weird rainbow colored stuff going on in public schools as well. So, school choice is going to be back come January. The legislative session is coming. I don't anticipate anything major is going to change from the primaries, which just took place, through the general election. I think we're going to continue to see a gradual increase in actual conservative principles being represented in those who are elected to public office. But when it comes to asserting that freedom and the reasons that people come to the gem state, they're not here for the wrong reasons. They're not here to impose their point of view on the rest of the world and create a handmaid's tale kind of world. They're here to secure their freedom and their children's freedom, and we should welcome them as such. And also be very wary of anyone who tries to tell you that we live in a democracy rather than a republic. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing